Hey guys, we're here today with Josiah Middaugh, professional triathlete, coach, Xterra world champion, and I believe 14-time USA Xterra national champion. We're going to have a little bit of a catch up with him today in regards to what 2020 has looked like for him and what he has in the future. So hey Josiah, how are you today?
Good. Thanks, Gerard. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Doing
no
well.
worries. Awesome, awesome. How is the weather out there up in Vail? Getting chilly?
It's getting chilly. Fall has finally hit. It's beautiful out. Leaves are amazing, but it was a crisp about 32 degrees this morning.
Oh yeah, no doubt. Definitely winter's creeping in, but I'm sure it leads to some great riding and training out there this time of year.
Yeah, it's perfect right now, actually.
Awesome, awesome. So I want to jump in a little bit, and we have a course coming out with you, a cycling course specifically. Titles "How to Become a Beast on the Bike," and I want to kind of get your perspective in regards to the course. What the details are surrounding it. You put the course together. It's structured by you not only as an athlete and your experiences, but also as a coach and your deep history. Working with athletes, coaching them. How long have you been coaching athletes? How did you take some of that knowledge and then some of your knowledge being an athlete and applying that to the course?
Yeah, so this course, it's all about, trying to capitalize on the most important leg of triathlon, and that's the bike. And most people they try to figure out how to carve out more time in their week to spend more time on the bike, thinking that that's going to yield the results. And looking back in my career, the first time that I finished third at Xterra Worlds, I mean, I was taking a very scientific approach to training, but I remember, being asked on the pro panel, oh, just you had the fastest split here last year. What was, how many hours a week are you spending on the bike? And, you must be spending, 10, 15 hours a week. And I was like, four, about 4 hours is what I got here. And it's how you spend that time that really makes the difference. And yeah, it'd be nice to spend more than 4 hours. And generally I do. But it's having a purposeful approach to training. And that's what most people are lacking.
Wow, that's pretty unbelievable. And you talk about that from the Xterra perspective, in 4 hours. But then people are out there and they're like, oh, for an Ironman, how much time do you need to put in on? You have to sit on the bike and do these like 6-7 hour rides. It really takes chunks out of your day. So what we were trying to cover is kind of you know eliminating a bunch of the noise from the cycling training perspective and really allowing the athlete to kind of focus in on like what's important to really get the most and maximize their training, within cycling, right?
Yeah. And I think all athletes and coaches, we have to realize is that, once you go over really 3 minutes, we're talking 90+% aerobic. And then when we're talking about triathlon, you talk about a sprint triathlon that takes 2 hours, or an Ironman that might be taking 10, 12, 15, 17 hours. I mean, we're talking 99% aerobic. And so the difference between, I mean, yeah, an Olympic distance triathlete is at a higher intensity level for that whole race. But we really break down the energy systems and how to train those systems. And that's going to translate to every length of event. And, something like Ironman, like, yes, you do those quality sessions, they focus on an energy system that's a little bit lower than Olympic distance or sprint triathlete. But at the end of the day, we're training those things very similarly. And then the length of the long ride's obviously going to be different. And you have to prepare for the demands of whichever niche of triathlon you're in. But it's surprising when you figure out like what's most important and what is going to make me stronger. Things actually kind of come back together. And I race off-road, but I train indoors, 6 months of the year. That's a lot like a lot of road triathletes do. And then through the summer, I'm not just out riding fun trails all the time. Riding fun trails is something that I do for technique and for enjoyment. But I put in the work, with more than 50% of my biking time on the road bike.
No, that's great. And I think that's, great to kind of make that comparison between the two, because, it's very interesting how, and we cover this in the course itself, is how different cycling styles, whether it be, gravel, mountain bike, fat bike, road cycling or triathlon, kind of all have this relationship with each other, where you can kind of go, depending on the time of the year or what your focus is specifically, you can obviously use different styles of riding to kind of, incorporate it into your training, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And when we talk about really becoming stronger on the bike, there's not one little secret, but threshold is king. And so when we talk about, being able to go really hard for 1 minute, but, in something like a Xterra race, or say a draft legal triathlon, maybe you have all these repeated efforts that are way over threshold. And you think, oh, well, it must be really important to be able to go really hard for 30 seconds for 1 minute. And really, when you stretch that out over an hour, hour and a half, it's really about what is your functional threshold power divided by your weight in kilos, right? So that watts per kilogram on the bike. Yep. And that's what's going to be your big limiter. And when you stretch that out, for half Ironman, then maybe you're working at 80-85% of that, for the whole distance of a race. And Ironman, maybe you're 75-80% of that. But it's that number that's going to, building a bigger engine is what it's all about.
Yep.
And I've done races, with a power meter where, I was over 500 watts, 115 times on the bike, but I hadn't done a single sprint hard workout session, but I had been doing very specific threshold training. And so I was able to outsplit everybody on the bike because of that threshold power, not because, how many watts I could do for 30 seconds. That's not what the race is about. So kind of understanding those energy systems and how they play into it, and really saying, okay, what's most important? This is the amount of time I have to commit. And no, maybe I can't ride my bike like a Tour de France cyclist. I'm on my bike 6 hours a day. No, I'm going to be on my bike, 1 hour, 3 days a week, and a long ride on the weekends. It's how would I be able to maximize my time on the bike?
No doubt. And that's the reality of, a majority of the athletes these days is, you have work, you have children, you have family, you need to take care of that. You have other responsibilities outside of the sport. And it's really, taking all this information and allowing you to focus in on, again, eliminating the noise and focusing on what's important. So we're super excited to get the course out. I think it's going to be a lot of added benefits for athletes out there. We appreciate you taking time to kind of cover some of this, but I want to move on to kind of, what you've been focusing on this year. 2020 has kind of been weird for everybody. It's kind of thrown a wrench into everybody's racing plans and training plans. So kind of when things made a change, what was your focus for 2020? And then how did that change once, obviously COVID came around?
Yeah, 2020, like everyone, I think was a huge surprise, and kind of threw a wrench in everything, and from a professional triathlete standpoint, it was, throwing a wrench in, not just the race schedule, but sponsorship and, everything that goes along with it. And then all of a sudden, trying to figure out how do you justify being a professional triathlete, and what does that even mean? And, is it significant or not?
Yeah.
But then, kind of the further along we got into it, realizing that, this engaging in the process, the training, the racing, it's not just the outcome. It's not just about, that one race on the schedule, that's your A race or whatever it is, but it's more about the journey, more about the lifestyle. And then I have a saying that I've always had, and it applies to a couple different things, but it's, if you're always ready, you never have to get ready. And I really think it's a huge mistake for people that just kind of throw their hands up in the air and say, well, there's no races. So what's the point? Why am I doing this? And I think that training focus can change. And you may actually have some pleasant surprises there if you get off your 3 routes that you do every single time you go out the door, and for me, get into the backcountry a little bit more often, and do some things for the pure enjoyment of it, but then also circling back and bringing some of that structure in, and instead of training for a specific outcome, you're training for a certain, maybe a performance parameter, like, okay, I'm going to use this time to work on a weakness, or I'm going to use this time to double down on a strength. And I'm going to see how good I can get at a certain thing. And, nowadays there's lots of measuring sticks. If you have, something like Strava, or, lots of data on Training Peaks going years back, what you've done before, and you can kind of play some games with that. And that's what I've been doing a lot, a lot of Strava challenges. And then we're pretty fortunate. We had some events come back online where I could really test my fitness. We have a local mountain bike town series, and all of a sudden we went from maybe 6 pro men in the race to 30.
Oh, wow.
So that was pretty wild. We had athletes coming from Utah, all the best mountain bikers in Colorado coming out on a Wednesday to race in my backyard. And so then that was, wow, this is amazing, and trying to take advantage of that. And, right when you think that you've done everything that you can do to improve your performance in one area, I actually saw another bump in my cycling fitness this year. And maybe that I was able to, focus a little bit more in on some of those local competitions, instead of just using those to train for whatever big event is coming next. So that's been kind of fun, trying to throw it down with some of the single sport athletes. I always enjoy that. And that's always a good challenge for me. Some of us as triathletes are, jack of all trades, master of none. But to be at the very top of the sport, you have to be able to compete, with the best bikers, the best runners. I'd love to say the best swimmers. I've never experienced that, but I'd like to be able to do that too.
So what has your single sport focus been? Has it, you kind of touched upon your swim being a little bit of the weakness. Have you been focused more on developing the weakness, or enjoying your favorite part of that, the sport?
A little bit of both. So we had some swim run races come back on, and we did
Very nice.
6 weeks of swim run races. And so I saw just some steady progress in my, swimming the same course, 1,500 meter swim time, kind of ticking down. And so I felt like if races did come back online, I'd be ready to jump into a triathlon at a similar place as other years. But then when we realized they weren't coming back online, but that some of these mountain bike races were, I tapered off just a little bit with the swimming, and really focused in on the cycling, and that's been fun. So
that's awesome.
I ended up kind of doubling down on my strength, which,
Doesn't
if there's one strength that would be worthwhile, I think it is the bike, because it's the biggest proportion. And that's what we talk a lot about in the course is, let's take a little bit of a Moneyball approach to this. Like, okay, how much time do you have to gain in the swim? Is it a minute? Is it 3 minutes? And depending on what that is, how much time you allocate to that. But on the bike, is it 10 minutes? Is it 15 minutes? Is it 20 minutes that you're giving up to somebody in your age group, and just that niche, that one, what we think of as 1/3 of the race? Well, is it 1/3, or is it 55%? Or in Xterra, is it 60 or 65%? Like, that's a huge amount of the race.
Most
and
definitely.
if you want to be on the podium, you got to think about that.
Yeah, you got to focus on that. So, everybody hop on their Strava and start working on those KOMs. That's for sure.
That's right.
So I want to kind of jump back a little bit. You talked about the value or the meaning of being like a professional triathlete, especially as this time comes, and it's very rare to kind of get a look into kind of like your experience, or, it's not even you in general. Like, there's a lot of professional triathletes that are out there who are kind of experiencing this weird shift and like what it means. So are you able to kind of dive into that a little bit more, just like your personal experience? But I also know it's, it's not just you. There's
Right.
many more out there, but like we have the opportunity to chat with you now, and I'd love to just get your thoughts on that and your feelings. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know if I want to how deep I can go. I've actually haven't had this conversation yet.
Oh, really?
Even with my wife, but well, I mean, to some degree, but yeah, it's kind of those thoughts like fundamentally, like is sport important?
Yeah.
And we see that with like the NBA bubble and football coming back, and I think that initially maybe a lot of people said no, there's a lot, politics is in our face right now. We've got a lot of social you know things going on in the media, and maybe sport does take a back seat, but for me, it's been a part of my life for so long, and I do think that sport is important, and trying to find where it fits. And obviously, speaking to somebody who's been an elite triathlete for almost 20 years now, yeah, for me, it's been a major part of my life. But I am towards the end of my career, and so this was potentially going to be my final season in the sport. And so now I'm at a place where I do want another go around. I do want to go out kind of on my own terms. And I do think that, sport is, a microcosm of life. There's a lot of things a lot of values, a lot of life lessons that you pick up from sport. And, racing internationally, it gives you a pretty amazing perspective on the world. And you have this small, the world becomes a smaller place, when you're part of it like that, and you get to see all these destinations. So I do think sport's important. It's important to me, and obviously it's probably important to anybody who listens to this.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think a lot of athletes, whether you're racing professionally or, racing at an amateur level, have kind of gone through that this year. Like where does sport fit? And, is it what's important right now?
Yeah.
And it's just, as always, what we're trying to do is kind of taking these teachable moments from like, professional athletes or people who have been in this for a while, and kind of shedding a little bit of light and providing maybe a little bit of guidance and direction. So it's great to hear kind of your thoughts behind that.
Yeah. I think for some people it's, this year especially, maybe it's more of a coping mechanism, which can also be of value. But when we talk about, really finding like what your true potential is in something, or how close you can get to that, I like to think of sport as the ultimate expression of yourself, because there's very few times where you can just lay it all out online. Like you're not going to walk in to a board meeting and just pour your heart and soul out onto that table, right?
Yeah. No,
But when
no
you're in
doubt.
a race, like you want it, like you are digging to depths that you maybe have never seen before
Yeah.
in some of these races. And, especially if the race gets longer, but you're trying to leave everything on the course. And I think there's few times in life where you get to do that.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's even providing a little bit of information for me. That's a great way to look at, sport in general. There's always a correlation. I've always known there was a correlation between life and then sport. But I've never looked at it from that perspective. Like this is the time that you have the opportunity to really lay it all out there. And I had a little bit of an experience this past weekend when I went out and did the 4-pass loop. There were some times where you were just like, I mean, I've raced Ironman for years now. And this past weekend, I think I've gone into darker places than I ever have in triathlon. So it's just very fascinating how like regardless of where you are, there's always that, opportunity to make that happen. So yeah, great insight on that. I appreciate that very much. So let's kind of jump into some of the races that you've been doing this year. Obviously not many Xterra races. I do believe they canceled all of them pretty early on in the season, right?
Yeah, I actually have not raced Xterra this year. I started off the season. I did the Fat Bike World Championship in Crested Butte, and everything was lining up to be a normal year at that point. That was in January. Then February, I did the Snowshoe National Championship, which happened to be in Leadville. So that was nice to bang out those two, national caliber races, but they're right here in Colorado. So that was fun. And then everything changed. So I never got to race a triathlon, but the local events that came back online, they're just things to really test your fitness, cross-country mountain bike races, some swim run events. And then I just did a race in Colorado Springs, the Pike Peak Apex. And that was a 4-day mountain bike stage race. Wow. And that was pretty amazing. That was, kind of the first prize money race to come back online, and everybody showed up, and it was amazing. I mean, there was, of the 200 plus athletes, it was elites, but it was also age group. But the thing is, like, everybody had just been chomping at the bit all year to be doing something. And I would say out of the 200 and I don't know, maybe 20 riders, like there was 150 to 200, like really good mountain bikers there.
Wow.
And there was probably 30 to 40, like really legit elite, just in the men's field, like pro men on the mountain bike that were just throwing it down.
Wow. So you had your work cut out for you, I assume, at that point.
Absolutely. It was a blast. It was broken up in 4 days. We had a prologue day one, and they seated us into waves, and it was all COVID protocols. And but yeah, once that gun went off, it was all you were thinking about is, how long can you ride with your heart in your throat, And the style of mountain bikers is very different, even from Xterra triathletes. We are also time trialing, just like you would in, a non-drafting Olympic distance and a half Ironman. It's you against the course. How fast can you complete it? And mountain bikers, it's very tactical, and they're just on the throttle all the time. It's full throttle, or it's backing off and conserving. And so it was a different kind of racing, but it was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. So have you done a race like this before? This kind of stage race, mountain bike stage race, or is this your first time dipping your toes into this?
Yeah, I did La Ruta in Costa Rica 2 years ago, and I finished second there. And that's a race coast to coast across Costa Rica, 3 days. Wow. Super rugged terrain, and that was a blast. That was just 2 years ago. Finished second overall there, and then years ago, it was probably, I don't know, maybe 2006 or something, I raced the Cape Epic, and that's at that time it was a 9-day stage mountain bike race, and that was pretty amazing.
That's awesome. So how did how did things kind of unfold in the Pikes Peak Apex race?
So I ended up fourth place, and that was after, I think, 7.5 hours of racing, and it came down to seconds. I had a 2-second lead over. I was in third place going into day 4, and I ended up giving up about 20 seconds. I think it was 19 seconds to the guy who won, Ryan Standish, who won day 1, who's so arguably the best technical mountain biker there. I had a 2-second lead, and we peaked out on the final climb with him right on my wheel, and there was no way I was going to block the trail for him. So I let him by and just tried to stay as close as I could, but I couldn't keep the 2-second margin.
Well, that's still pretty impressive, fourth overall, from like a stacked field like you were talking about. How did you? I know there was a couple other professional triathletes out there. How did you fare in placing amongst the like triathlete focused athletes?
Yeah, I mean, so my good friend Bradley Weiss was there, and and he was strong. We rode together or around each other in the same pack on several of the days, but he ended up, I think, 7th or 8th in the race.
Nice.
So he lost a couple minutes on that final day.
Yeah.
But it was just full throttle racing, and every day was very different. On day 3 we had a 20-mile climb, so there was no downhill for a straight 20 miles. And on that one, nobody else wanted to work, and we had we had a little bit of a headwind. It wasn't too steep. So we're going, I mean, this is 15 miles an hour uphill
Yep.
on gravel. And I ended up basically leading the pack I was trying to whittle down the pack. We had like 40 guys, and I can't go into single track with 40 guys. So I completely blew myself up, but luckily blew up some other people at the same time and whittled that pack down to 6 or 7. So It was cool. Like every day was just very different.
No, that's awesome.
Yeah, I think some of the mountain bikers are like, what is this triathlete doing up there? Just doesn't he know he's burning himself out?
It's funny that you say that, because I always jump back to, like, obviously, like, you go out for a bike ride and you're a triathlete on the road. I compare everything to road because that's kind of my focus, but I didn't realize that it goes back and forth that way to, like, mountain bikers and then triathletes, off-road triathletes, you know what I mean?
Well, I don't think I was saying, like, that's mountain bike is usually road biking. It's always about conserve, and then you got to have the goods when the time calls. But mountain biking, it should be a little bit more you against the course. But mountain bikers are known for just throwing it down for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, or maybe 10 minutes at a time. And so they're very inconsistent with their pacing.
Yeah.
But just the way this stage lined up, a 20-mile climb is very unusual in a mountain bike race. You look at, like, World Cup mountain bike races, you climb for 3 minutes, So that was a little bit, it was more road tactics at that point, but which, as you know, most triathletes hate. And Bradley even said to me, that day, he said, "Oh, I saw you up there, Joe, at the front, and that was just driving you crazy that nobody was working." And I said, "Yeah, like I don't have patience. I can't wait and sit in the pack and, ride at 60%. I want to ride at 90%, or 100%.
You said that's your sweet spot, right?
Yeah.
No, that's great. So, is that something that you typically have on your calendar this time of year, like that race, or is this kind of like it was the perfect time to kind of go out there and race that race because others kind of were canceled at that time?
Yeah, typically no. I mean, this weekend would have been Xterra Nationals, or that same weekend. So normally I wouldn't be able to line something like that up. Occasionally I can squeeze something in between Xterra Nationals and Worlds, but usually not. Usually it's something like that would really disrupt the training too much. So it was a perfect thing to do this time of year.
Awesome. So something that I'm really curious about is this Eco Challenge that you did. I know nothing about it, so I can't really have like a knowledgeable conversation, but I think it's pretty cool, the concept. And I want to know a little bit about it, how you got involved with it, what it's about, that stuff.
Yeah, well, it kind of landed on my plate a little bit. When I first moved to Vail 20 years ago, there was a guy, Mike Closer, he was world mountain bike champ, but he won Eco Challenge 3 times. And I got to know him locally here, and then I'd see him on TV winning the Eco Challenge race. And then it went away. So Mark Burnett, who started Eco Challenge, he also started Survivor and is the most successful reality show producer ever of all time. And he basically put Eco Challenge on a shelf for 17 years. And so then it finally came back, and I had always, in the back of my mind, I said, if this ever came back, I would love the opportunity to do it. And so Mike, who is then 59, he said that he put a team in together. And I said, hey, well, if anything happens, anybody drops out, keep me in mind. I'd love to do it. Wow. And I was just looking for adventure. And so sure enough, he called me up and he said, hey, we got a spot for you if you want to do it. And I thought, at first I said no, because it just like, how can you fit an Eco Challenge into
no doubt,
Xterra season, triathlon season? It doesn't really fit. But I just decided I couldn't pass it up. I just had to do it. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend throwing Eco Challenge in the middle of a season. But I did.
Like everything aligned properly this year, right?
Yeah.
You ended up not having any Xterra races. You had the freedom and the flexibility to kind of do that. So like what is it? Like what is an Eco Challenge? Like what do you do as a contestant or like somebody who's participating in that?
Yeah, so that is Eco Challenge. It's considered an expedition race. So it's nonstop. In this case, it was 417 miles, and you go through the night. And Fiji, this was in Fiji, there's 12 hours light, 12 hours darkness. We went through, I think, around 30 checkpoints, and everything is map and compass navigation. So there's no smartwatches, no GPS devices, no phones. I mean, we put our phones in a bag, checked them in with somebody, and, you know, had no phone for about a 2-week period.
Wow.
And we were racing. They said the race, you know, the leaders are going to be somewhere around 7-8 days, and the cutoff is 14 days. And it was trekking, mountain biking, paddling. It was actually about 40% on the water. So that was ocean, you know, and out in the ocean in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
It was up these rivers in Fiji, you know, stand-up paddleboard. We had outrigger canoes. We had these indigenous watercraft, which basically was just ended up being a really heavy canoe because you had a sail, but we never got a chance to use it.
Yeah.
And then you're carrying everything with you. You got a pack, and it's a 4-person team, and it's co-ed. So we had 3 men and 1 female. And it was a blast. It was a lot of fun. There was some
pretty
some
wild.
lows, but we had a good time.
That's pretty wild. That's awesome. And you know, to have the ability to do something like that is truly amazing. So was it like 100% self-supported? Like you were carrying your own water? Did you have like a filter for water that you had to get, or did they provide you with some of that stuff?
So there was, over the 417 miles, we had 4 camps. And that's where we had 1 support person that would drive ahead to this camp. And he'd be driving all day to get to this camp, and he might be waiting, you know, 12 hours for us, or he might be waiting 3 days for us.
Oh, wow.
And so he didn't have a cell phone or anything either. And so he's waiting at this camp. And so we would stock everything to be out for at least a day, but usually we'd be out for 2 days. So and that was food, water, and we'd run out of water. We used these water drops that were pretty nifty, actually. And it was, I mean, it sanitizes water in about 1 minute. So you throw about 10 drops in a water bottle. And so we're just filling up in creeks or whatever we came across.
Very
And
cool.
yeah, it's just nonstop. And a lot of times we had planned food to be out for about 24 hours. And sometimes we'd be out for 48. And so we'd run out sometimes and
Oh man.
just have to suffer through, or we'd have to find a small village. But sometimes they didn't have anything, you know. One time we found these crackers that would take you like 15 minutes to chew because they're so dry, and then a can of tuna. But the tuna in Fiji is like, it's got scales and fish heads and eyes and bones in there. So it's not quite the same kind of tuna.
Yeah. Well, that's wild. Yeah. So, I mean, it was an adventure, that's for sure. That's pretty awesome. So how did you and your team fare? Like, you know, you said some of the best teams would be 8 days, did you say?
Yeah.
How did you guys?
Yeah, so we were 9 days.
Wow.
We made some early navigation errors, and it cost us dearly. We had a 4-hour error, and then we hit the next camp. The first camp that we came to, they closed this gorge, and it cost us about 12 hours because
holy cow.
We got there 4 p.m. and we couldn't leave till 6 a.m. So that was 13, 14 hours that we were stuck in place, and the clock's always running, right? So, you know, we ended up half a day behind, like right off the bat, and we're kind of shuffled back to like 30th position in the race. And we were just trying to catch up the whole race, and those errors kind of compounded themselves. We'd hit, you know, sections in the dark that the lead teams hit in the night, or, you know, this tropical storm came through, and
oh my gosh,
of course we were on the mountain bike, and so like the muddiest stuff you've ever seen. That's how adventure racing is, where okay, you're on a mountain bike leg, but you might not be able to ride your mountain bike. Or we're on the stand-up paddleboard, and this lake turns into a creek, and then it runs out, and then you're carrying your paddleboard like 5K at 2 a.m. in the morning, you know, looking for a checkpoint.
Wow.
So we're spending like that night in the rain, 7 hours looking for the checkpoint. Your feet are wet 100% of the time.
Yeah.
and they never dry out.
That's crazy. So definitely like a very interesting race, a little bit different. You said there was 30 teams, or was there more than
There
30?
was 66 teams that started.
That seems like a lot. Like a
Yeah.
lot of people would participate in something like as massive as that in such like a I don't want to say it's like necessarily remote, but it's like, I mean, you got to do a lot of work to get there. It's not like you're
Yeah.
just, it's not like it's domestic or like over in Europe. Like that's a big commitment. So there's like obviously a big like following behind this, people who probably do this pretty regularly, huh?
There is. There's some pockets of the world where it's still very popular, like New Zealand. A lot of racing in Asia, actually. And then there's elite teams from all over, but this was kind of a once in a lifetime race, because this was, most people lose their shirt adventure racing because the time commitment and it might cost you $10,000 to get to a race, where this was all supported by Amazon Prime or Eco Challenge that put it on. They got, I think it was a $20 million production. So to be a part of something like that was pretty unique. Like they did everything the right way.
Wow. That's unbelievable. So
no corners were cut.
Do you foresee this again in your future? Or is this a one and done?
Well, so we submitted a team for Patagonia. So there's going to be at least one more.
That's awesome.
But they don't know the date for sure. It's either going to be February, early March, or it might get pushed off till next November. So we're thinking probably next November, but we won't know for sure. And we don't know if we're going to be accepted either.
Yeah. So let's, it's a good transition into the future, right? So what does the future hold for you, Josiah? You had briefly mentioned, this year was going to be your last year, but you want to leave on your own terms. Does that mean if things kind of align next year and, everything gets back to normal, that you're going to be racing Xterra races or off-road triathlon in general?
Yeah, I would like you said, I want to go out on my own terms. I'd like to give Xterra Worlds another crack. So I'd really like to line it up for one final season. And just the way that things have been going, I'm 42, but it's wild that, some of these metrics that we track, like they're the best they've ever been. And so that's what's cool about triathlon. And I do think a lot of, age groupers can relate. A lot of age groupers are, they might discover triathlon later in life, and they might be hitting their stride in their mid or late 40s a lot of times. And I wouldn't say I found it too late in my career, but I definitely call myself a late bloomer. And I'm as strong on the bike as I've ever been, and my running's not too far behind. I'm just barely holding off my 16-year-old son though. So
well, you have him to keep up with, right?
We battle it out on some Strava segments running, and my 15-year-old is right behind. So, they're running 16-minute 5Ks. So I can't even do hard workouts with them anymore. But yeah, I'd like to give it one more crack and really go out on my own terms.
No, that's wonderful. So, couple, and I'm gonna jump into this here. There's a couple questions. Feel free to answer as much or as little as you'd like to answer. So, let me think of how to word this. What do you think the future of off-road triathlon holds? What does that look like to you? And I guess we can kind of jump into like, what does the future of Xterra too potentially look like from your eyes?
Well, I wish I had a crystal ball for that one. But I do think whether or not it's Xterra or not, but there is a lot of future growth, I think, for off-road events. And you see with the explosion of gravel biking, and, Xterra has been growing internationally for a long time with races all over the world, and, racing the Pan American series and seeing these different places in the world and realizing that, roads are not necessarily getting safer. You've got road triathletes training indoors. for big portions of their training because, there's too much road furniture, there's distracted drivers, roads are getting busy. And so I do think there's a lot of potential off-road. And I think that could be really good for Xterra, but some sort of off-road event. And I also think in this pandemic, I think really accelerated it. But I think that people are seeking adventure, and that's myself included. And they're looking for something stimulating, something new. And that's what's kept me in the sport of Xterra, is that every course is different. And I know you get some of that on the road, but it's more about, the conditions in one environment might be different than another. But with Xterra, like, it's totally different, where you might have super technical course, you have a big mountain climbing course at altitude, or you have a tropical, jungle-like feel, and everything it requires a different skill set, but then it also allows you to go to these amazing destinations and see the world in a very different way than you would if you're, at the all-inclusive hotel.
No doubt. I totally agree with you. Again, I experienced that adventure, and deviating from the road this past weekend. And it's like, shoot, you're like, there's so much more you can do with the fitness than, just like, and you even said earlier, like doing the same loop over and over again on the bike or the run. Like, it's so easy to get caught up in like, hey, like, this is my workout for today. And like, for majority of the workouts that I do, I have like this loop that I do, because it's just, especially now, because a lot of the bathrooms with water are still closed down in certain areas. So like, it's a place I know that I can bring a bottle, leave the bottle, and I can always get back to in a certain amount of time. So it's really like breaking out of that like routine and that groove and finding adventure a little bit more, in my opinion. Yeah. So you obviously have a lot of confidence in the direction and the future of off-road triathlon, it sounds like.
I think so. I mean, I'm generally a pretty optimistic guy, but I do think, and maybe it's just how I'm feeling personally, but I think people are seeking adventure, and off-road is kind of where it's at.
That's a great statement to end this, right? One thing that I do want to do is just, if somebody is, a road triathlete, and they're kind of like towing the edge of that off-road experience, diving into it, what's some advice that you could give them? How would you give them, provide them a little bit of guidance to kind of, dip their toes into that end of the sport?
Yeah, I think, you don't know what you don't know. And I think you have to go into it with open mind and realize, just like how I feel when I go race on the road, good chance you're going to be humbled a little bit. Right. And so there's parts of the course that you're going to really excel at. And there's places where it might be very eye-opening. And, failure is learning. And if you find that something's a little beyond your skill level, what's cool about off-road triathlon, these are not going to be wicked, wild technical courses, but you may find them technical your first time out, because, we have a race here, the Beaver Creek Xterra is the mountain championship. And, there was a local ITU friend of mine, and he's like, hey, is this course technical? And all the Xterra people say, it's not technical at all. I said, well, it's not technical, but you're going to find it technical, because, you're going to have some roots and you're going to have some turns. And I said, but, it's really not that technical. And then he went and rode it. He's like, whoa, man, you didn't tell me there's going to be roots and there's going to be rocks and there's going to be bumps. And so I think you have to go out with open mind and just really experience it. And I don't know. I think you'll find that there's, just like how you're drawn to triathlon, there's areas for improvement. And with off-road, it's just to another level because you have the skill component of it that's just a little bit higher. So I don't know. I think it might fill your cup.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, anything else you'd like to add before we kind of close this out?
No, I guess I would just say, I didn't hold back at all when we produced this course. And there's a lot of information there, and it's not just for athletes, but I think it'd be good for coaches too. But it's really talking about energy systems and dialing in zones and working with some of these metrics. But it's in a way that is really digestible. And I think that regardless if you have any background in exercise physiology or not, like you're going to get a lot out of it, because it's just going to explain, in pretty simple terms, what's important to focus on, and how you can focus on it. And it takes a little bit of the guesswork out of things. Not guesswork, but kind of demystifies it a little bit, as far as, some of these metrics that people talk about, their FTP, or, what does that mean? How do you train with heart rate? Or somebody said, well, you train with heart rate. Why do you do that? Why don't you just train with power? Like, well, actually heart rate's, good for this, and power is good for this. And why don't you use them both? Or if you don't have power, how could you use heart rate in a similar way that you use power? And so, it's not, you take, wherever you're coming from, you're going to get something good out of it, I think. And there's a lot of information there.
Excellent. Thanks, Josiah. And what we're going to do is we're going to throw a link down at the bottom so you guys can check out the course. It's How to Become a Beast on the Bike. It will launch and go live tomorrow afternoon. So keep an eye out for that. We're excited for it. Josiah, thank you for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, truly appreciate the transparency. And again, we look forward to having you on again here.
Awesome. Thanks, Gerard.